Picture this mathematical paradox. The more precisely I calculated the limitations of human reason, the more clearly I saw the necessity of divine revelation. When I first encountered Descartes' methodical doubt, I was fascinated by its intellectual rigor. Here was a system that promised absolute certainty through pure reason alone. Yet as I applied this same mathematical precision to the method itself, I discovered something Descartes had missed. His foundation was far less solid than he claimed. Through my experiments with atmospheric pressure and probability theory, I learned that the most honest scientific approach acknowledges the boundaries of empirical knowledge. Cartesian doubt, despite its apparent sophistication, actually represents a profound intellectual arrogance, the assumption that human reason, starting from scratch, can reconstruct all truth. But what if the very capacity for doubt itself points beyond reason to something greater? What if the mathematical evidence suggests that biblical faith, rather than contradicting scientific method, actually provides the only stable foundation for knowledge itself? Today, I want to show you why abandoning Cartesian skepticism for biblical truth wasn't a retreat from intellectual rigor, but the most logical conclusion of taking that rigor seriously. The calculation is startling. When you honestly assess the probabilities, biblical faith emerges not as the enemy of reason, but as its necessary foundation. Chapter 1: The Mathematical Flaw in Cartesian Foundation. When Descartes proposed systematic doubt as the path to certain knowledge, he made a critical mathematical error, one that becomes obvious when you apply probability theory to his method. He assumed that doubt could serve as a neutral starting point, but this assumption violates basic principles of logical consistency. Consider the structure of his argument: I doubt everything, therefore I think, therefore I am. But this creates what mathematicians call a recursive paradox. If you truly doubt everything, you must doubt your capacity to doubt accurately. If you doubt your capacity to doubt, you cannot trust your conclusion that you think. If you cannot trust that you think, you cannot trust that you are. The cogito becomes self-defeating when subjected to its own methodology. In my atmospheric pressure experiments, I learned that you cannot measure pressure without assuming the reliability of your measuring instruments. Similarly, you cannot establish the reliability of reason through reason alone without circular reasoning. Descartes' method requires him to assume the very thing he claims to prove, the trustworthiness of rational reflection. But here's the deeper mathematical problem. Cartesian doubt treats uncertainty as if it were a positive starting point for knowledge. This is like trying to build a mathematical proof by beginning with the assumption that mathematics might be false. You can construct no stable geometry this way. In probability theory, we recognize that meaningful calculations require some background assumptions about the reliability of our methods. Complete skepticism makes calculation impossible. Biblical faith, by contrast, doesn't claim to prove God's existence through pure reason alone. Instead, it recognizes that all knowledge, including mathematical knowledge, requires foundational assumptions that cannot themselves be proven within the system. This is actually more intellectually honest than Cartesian rationalism. When I calculated the probabilities involved in maintaining genuine doubt versus accepting biblical revelation, I discovered that Cartesian skepticism is self-refuting while biblical faith provides rational consistency. The evidence doesn't support absolute autonomy of human reason. It supports the necessity of revelation for any knowledge at all, including scientific knowledge. This wasn't a defeat for logic, it was logic's greatest victory. True rational analysis reveals the limits of rationalism and points towards something greater than itself. Chapter 2: The Experimental Failure of Pure Reason. My scientific training taught me to test hypotheses through experimentation. When I applied this method to Cartesian philosophy, the results were conclusive. Pure reason alone cannot deliver the certainty it promises. Take Descartes' attempt to prove God's existence through the ontological argument. He argues that since he can conceive of a perfect being, such a being must exist, because existence is a perfection. But this commits what we might call the conceptual fallacy, treating mental constructs as if they were empirical realities. In my mathematical work, I learned that you cannot derive existence from definition alone. Geometric objects exist in mathematical space because we define them into existence within that system. But physical reality operates under different constraints. I tested this experimentally through my work on vacuum. Aristotelian philosophers insisted that nature abhors a vacuum. Their reasoning seemed airtight within their conceptual system. But when I actually performed the experiments, creating partial vacuums with mercury columns, nature demonstrated no such abhorrence. Reality operated according to principles that pure philosophical reasoning had missed entirely. This taught me a crucial lesson: the most sophisticated rational arguments can be completely wrong about fundamental realities. Cartesian method suffers from the same limitation. Its reasoning about God, soul, and world proceeds through conceptual analysis rather than engagement with actual revelation and spiritual experience. Biblical faith, however, claims to be based on historical events, empirical testimonies, and experiential encounter with divine reality. The Gospels present themselves as eyewitness accounts of observable phenomena. The resurrection is claimed as a historical event that left physical evidence. This is much closer to scientific methodology than Cartesian pure reasoning. When I calculated the probability that multiple independent witnesses would fabricate identical lies about extraordinary events, maintain those lies under persecution unto death, and successfully convince thousands of educated contemporaries, the mathematical result was clear: the testimony is more likely true than false. Moreover, biblical faith produces measurably different outcomes in human behavior and psychological well-being. You can test Christian claims about forgiveness, peace, and moral transformation through observation. Cartesian doubt, by contrast, produces no observable effects except intellectual paralysis. The experimental evidence favors biblical faith over Cartesian rationalism. This conclusion emerged from applying scientific rigor, not abandoning it. Chapter 3: The probability calculation that changed everything. The turning point came when I applied my newly developed probability theory to the fundamental question: what are the odds that human reason alone can access ultimate truth about existence, meaning, and morality? Let me walk you through the calculation. Consider the vast complexity of existence, from the mathematical constants that govern physics to the intricate biological systems that sustain life to the emergence of consciousness itself. Cartesian method assumes that human reason, starting from doubt, can reconstruct understanding of all this complexity through logical analysis alone. But calculate the probability. If human reason is the product of evolutionary processes operating according to survival value rather than truth value, what are the odds that it reliably tracks reality about non-survival related questions? Darwin himself recognized this problem, wondering whether the convictions of a monkey's mind could be trusted about anything. Furthermore, if consciousness is merely an emergent property of material processes, what are the odds that its intuitions about meaning, morality, and metaphysics correspond to objective realities? The probability approaches zero. Cartesian rationalism depends on assuming that reason reliably tracks truth, but it cannot justify this assumption without circularity. Now consider the alternative calculation. Biblical revelation claims that human reason was designed by ultimate intelligence to participate in truth, but was corrupted by rebellion against its source. This would predict exactly what we observe: reason capable of remarkable insights in mathematics and science, but systematically unreliable when operating independently in ultimate questions. Biblical revelation also provides external confirmation through fulfilled prophecy, historical validation, and transformative power in human experience. When I calculated the probability that ancient texts could accurately predict specific historical events centuries in advance, or that a crucified Jewish rabbi could transform the entire trajectory of world civilization. The numbers were extraordinary. The probability calculation became decisive when I considered the consequences of error. If Cartesian doubt is wrong, you've wasted your life in intellectual vanity and missed the truth about existence. If biblical faith is wrong, you've lived according to love, justice, and hope, arguably the best possible life even if there's no afterlife. But the probabilities aren't equal. The mathematical evidence strongly favors biblical revelation over Cartesian rationalism. This isn't a leap of faith against reason, it's the most rational conclusion based on rigorous analysis of available evidence. My famous wager wasn't about believing without evidence. It was about recognizing that the mathematical evidence already pointed toward biblical truth, and that the calculation of potential outcomes made faith the rational choice even under uncertainty. Chapter 4, where Descartes' clear and distinct ideas failed. Descartes claimed that clear and distinct ideas are the criterion of truth. If you can perceive something clearly and distinctly, it must be true. This sounds reasonable until you apply mathematical rigor to the claim itself. Through my work in geometry and probability, I discovered that clarity and distinctness are insufficient guarantees of truth. Consider mathematical examples first. Euclidean geometry seems perfectly clear and distinct. Parallel lines never meet. The sum of angles in a triangle equals 180 degrees. These propositions appeared self-evidently true for millennia. Yet non-Euclidean geometries demonstrate that these clear and distinct ideas describe only one possible mathematical space among many. What seemed obviously true was actually contingent on specific assumptions. Similarly, it seemed clear and distinct to ancient mathematicians that all numbers could be expressed as ratios of integers. The discovery of irrational numbers shattered this clarity. Even in mathematics, our most rigorous domain, apparent clarity can mask fundamental misconceptions. The problem becomes far worse when we apply Cartesian criteria to existence, consciousness, and morality. Descartes thought it clear and distinct that mind and matter are separate substances. But this dualism creates impossible problems. How does immaterial mind interact with material brain? Modern neuroscience reveals intimate connections between mental states and physical processes that Cartesian dualism cannot explain. Descartes also thought it clear and distinct that God's existence follows necessarily from the concept of perfection. But this argument assumes that existence is a property like redness or roundness, rather than the foundation that makes properties possible. The clarity was illusory, a linguistic confusion masquerading as metaphysical insight. Biblical revelation operates on entirely different principles. Rather than claiming that truth is whatever seems clear to human reason, Scripture acknowledges that ultimate reality often transcends human comprehension. The Trinity, the Incarnation, divine sovereignty, and human responsibility, these doctrines strain human logic precisely because they describe realities larger than human conceptual capacity. This difference proves crucial. When I tested Cartesian clear and distinct ideas against experience, they consistently failed to account for the complexity of reality. When I tested biblical teachings against experience, they illuminated aspects of existence that pure reason had missed entirely. The mathematical lesson is profound. Clarity to finite minds is no guarantee of objective truth. Ultimate reality might be too rich and complex for complete rational comprehension. Biblical faith acknowledges this limitation while still providing reliable guidance for human life and understanding. Cartesian rationalism makes promises it cannot keep. Chapter 5, The Heart's Logic That Reason Cannot Reach. Through my mathematical work, I discovered something that revolutionized my understanding of knowledge itself. There are different types of logical processes, and the heart has its own logic that pure reason cannot access. This wasn't mystical anti-intellectualism, it was a more sophisticated understanding of how human beings actually acquire and validate knowledge. Consider how we know mathematical axioms. You cannot prove that the whole is greater than its parts through syllogistic reasoning, because any such proof would already assume the axiom. Instead, we know this through what I call knowledge of the heart, immediate intuitive apprehension that provides the foundation for all subsequent reasoning. Without this intuitive knowledge, mathematical reasoning would be impossible. The same principle applies throughout human experience. We know that we exist, that we have thoughts and feelings, that other people have minds like ours, not through chains of logical argument, but through immediate intuitive knowledge. We trust memory, perception, and basic logical principles through heart knowledge that underlies all reasoning. Descartes missed this completely. He tried to derive everything through pure rational analysis, but rational analysis itself depends on intuitive foundations that cannot be rationally justified without circularity. The heart provides the axioms, reason builds the theorems. Biblical faith operates according to this same structure. Scripture teaches that God has written His law on human hearts. That divine reality can be known through conscience and spiritual intuition as well as through rational reflection. This isn't opposed to reason, it's the foundation that makes reason possible. When I experienced my night of fire, that profound spiritual encounter with divine reality, I didn't abandon intellectual rigor. I discovered a deeper source of knowledge that illuminated and confirmed what reason could partially apprehend. The heart's knowledge of God's reality provided axioms for understanding existence, meaning, and morality that pure reason alone could never establish. This explains why biblical faith produces intellectual fruit while Cartesian doubt produces only skeptical paralysis. Biblical revelation provides heart knowledge of ultimate reality that enables rather than constrains rational investigation. When you know that the universe is rationally designed by supreme intelligence, you have reason to expect that mathematical investigation will uncover genuine truths about physical reality. Cartesian method, by contrast, cuts reason off from its intuitive foundations and then wonders why it cannot reconstruct knowledge from pure analysis. It's like trying to prove the reliability of mathematics while refusing to trust mathematical intuition, impossible and unnecessary. The heart has reasons that reason knows not, but these reasons provide the foundation for all reasoning, including scientific reasoning. Chapter 6, Biblical Faith as Superior Scientific Methodology. The most remarkable discovery of my intellectual journey was that biblical faith provides a superior foundation for scientific methodology than Cartesian doubt. This seems counterintuitive until you examine the logical structure of scientific investigation itself. Science depends on several foundational assumptions that cannot be scientifically proven, that nature operates according to consistent laws, that human reason can apprehend these laws, that mathematical description captures real features of physical reality, and that empirical investigation yields genuine knowledge rather than mere appearances. Cartesian doubt undermines confidence in all these assumptions. If you doubt everything, you cannot trust that experiments reveal anything about reality beyond subjective experience. Biblical faith, however, provides rational grounds for scientific confidence. If the universe was designed by supreme intelligence, we have reason to expect that it operates according to discoverable principles. If human beings were created in God's image, we have reason to trust that our rational faculties can apprehend real features of creation. If God is truth itself, we have reason to expect that honest investigation will reveal rather than contradict divine reality. This explains the historical development of modern science. The scientific revolution emerged primarily in Christian cultures because biblical theism provided intellectual foundations that made scientific investigation seem both possible and valuable. Muslim and Chinese civilizations made remarkable technical advances, but systematic experimental science developed where biblical faith had prepared the intellectual soil. My own scientific work exemplifies this principle. When I investigated atmospheric pressure, I trusted that careful measurement would reveal genuine features of physical reality because I believed the physical world was rationally designed. When I developed probability theory, I assumed that mathematical analysis could illuminate real patterns in complex phenomena because I believed mathematics reflects divine wisdom embedded in creation. Cartesian rationalism cannot provide equivalent foundations. If reason is autonomous, why should its categories correspond to external reality? If doubt is methodologically primary, why trust that any investigation yields knowledge rather than mere opinion? Biblical revelation solves these problems by locating human reason within a larger rational order. Finite minds can apprehend genuine truth because they participate in infinite wisdom. Scientific investigation succeeds because it explores God's creation using faculties designed for that purpose. This isn't science versus faith, it's recognition that biblical faith provides the most rational foundation for scientific confidence. The greatest scientists throughout history understood this connection. Abandoning Cartesian doubt for biblical faith wasn't intellectual retreat, it was intellectual advance toward a more adequate foundation for all human knowledge. Chapter 7: The Mathematical Elegance of Biblical Truth. What finally convinced me was the mathematical elegance of biblical truth compared to the cumbersome contradictions of Cartesian rationalism. When you analyze both systems rigorously, biblical revelation displays the logical beauty we associate with mathematical truth, while Cartesian philosophy generates paradoxes and infinite regresses. Consider the problem of knowledge itself. Cartesian method claims that knowledge begins with doubt, but this creates an immediate paradox. You must know what knowledge is in order to doubt your existing knowledge. You must trust your capacity for accurate doubt in order to doubt accurately. The system assumes what it claims to derive, violating basic logical principles. Biblical epistemology avoids this paradox by acknowledging that knowledge begins with trust in divine revelation, trust in rational faculties designed by divine wisdom, trust in the reliability of a world created by trustworthy intelligence. This foundation enables rather than undermines subsequent rational investigation. The mathematical parallel is exact. Geometry begins with axioms accepted through intuitive conviction, then develops theorems through logical analysis. You cannot prove the axioms within the system, they provide the foundation that makes proof possible. Similarly, biblical revelation provides epistemological axioms that make all other knowledge possible, including scientific knowledge. Consider also the problem of meaning and morality. Cartesian rationalism struggles to derive objective values from pure analysis of material processes. How do you get ought from is through logical analysis alone? The attempt generates infinite regress or arbitrary stipulation. Biblical revelation solves this elegantly by locating moral truth in divine character revealed through historical action. Moral law reflects divine nature. Moral obligation reflects humanity's creation for relationship with God. This provides objective foundation for ethics that pure reason cannot achieve. Even more striking is the mathematical structure of biblical narrative itself. The story displays the logical elegance of a perfectly constructed proof. Creation establishes the context, fall introduces the problem requiring solution, redemption provides the solution through divine action, and restoration completes the logical development. Each element follows necessarily from what precedes while adding new information that transforms understanding of the whole. Cartesian philosophy lacks this narrative coherence. It fragments reality into disconnected substances, mind and matter, finite and infinite, temporal and eternal, without providing logical connections between them. The system lacks mathematical elegance. When I calculated the relative probability that reality would display the logical coherence we observe under each hypothesis, the result was decisive. Biblical theism predicts that reality will be rationally comprehensible because it reflects divine wisdom. Cartesian dualism predicts incomprehensible fragmentation. The mathematical evidence favors biblical truth. Conclusion. The calculation is complete, and the result transforms everything we thought we knew about faith and reason. Abandoning Cartesian doubt for biblical faith wasn't intellectual suicide, it was the most rational conclusion of rigorous mathematical analysis applied to the fundamental questions of existence. When you honestly assess the probabilities, biblical revelation emerges as a superior foundation for all human knowledge, including scientific knowledge. The heart's logic provides axioms that pure reason requires but cannot establish. Divine revelation illuminates realities that autonomous reason cannot reach. Christian faith enables rather than constrains intellectual investigation by providing stable foundations for confidence in rational inquiry. This doesn't mean abandoning intellectual rigor, it means applying that rigor more thoroughly and consistently. When you calculate honestly, factoring in the limitations of finite reason and the mathematical elegance of biblical truth, faith becomes the most logical choice. The greatest wager isn't faith versus reason, it's recognizing that true reason leads to faith in divine wisdom. My challenge to you is this: apply the same mathematical precision you would use in laboratory experiments to the evidence for biblical revelation. Calculate the probabilities. Assess the logical coherence. Test the practical results. The rigorous mind that truly seeks truth will discover what I discovered, that biblical faith and scientific reason are natural allies, not enemies, in humanity's greatest quest for understanding.